Paul, it's great to be here in North Carolina in 1992 at the CSCW conference. One problem is I've never been to this part of the country before, and I'm trying to think of a restaurant that would be fun to go to tonight. Do you have any ideas about good restaurants in North Carolina?
Well, I think I had something that might help. At the conference reception last night, I took a little survey. I asked a bunch of people where they'd gone and which restaurants they liked. I think we can let the crowd decide it for us.
Excellent.
So I've shown the results here in matrix form. Each of the people I talked to is a row, and each of the restaurants is a column. N in the red means they didn't like it, and Y means they did. The blank ones are people who haven't eaten there yet.
Well, this looks like great information. This should be really helpful. But there's a problem. I see that every restaurant has some people who didn't like it and some people who did like it. This is going to be difficult to choose. Well, I'll tell you what. Joe Constant is the person I know who knows restaurants the best. Just tell me which restaurant Joe went to, and I'll go there.
I'm sorry, I can't do that, John. I promised everyone I wouldn't tell if barbecue was their favorite. You know, health insurance rates and all that. But I think we can still do something useful with this data. Have you been to any of these restaurants?
Yes, on Sunday I ate at Magnolia Grill, and I liked it quite a bit.
In that case, I don't think you'll be wanting any recommendations for Raider 1 or for Raider 4, because they hated it.
Oh yes, that does help. It crosses out some of the no's. Let's see, Nana's, there's still someone who usually agrees with me who did not like it and someone who did like it, so I don't know if I'd like Nana's. And Bullock's, likely there's one person who liked it and one person who didn't like it, so I don't know if I'll like Bullock's. But Pyewacket, I see that both of the people who went, who agree with me on restaurants, liked. That sounds wonderful. I'll try Pyewacket tonight. Thank you very much, Paul.
So that scenario provides some intuitions about the basic idea of using other people's opinions to make personalized recommendations, but in an automated, aggregated way. Rather than restaurants, we're going to focus on something that's even more of a daily problem, separating out the wheat from the chaff in Netnews. This is joint work with three of our students, Danny Iakovu and Peter Bergstrom, working with John at Minnesota, and Nitesh Suchak, working with me at MIT. So I'm going to give a walkthrough of the group lens system, and then John's going to give some more detail about some of the design issues, the choices we made, and why. So I'd like to start by getting a show of hands. How many of you read Netnews on a regular basis? Right. It's pretty popular, and it keeps getting more and more popular. So Netnews is a distributed bulletin board system where the servers across the internet talk to each other, synchronizing so that no matter which server your client connects to, you can see the latest posts, which are called articles, because the original vision was that the post would be well thought out discourses like newspaper articles. Now, in 1994, there are more than 8,000 separate groups people can subscribe to, with more than 100 megabytes of data getting posted every day. Now, I have a 40 megabyte hard drive on my laptop, which I paid extra for, but that would fill up before dinner if I started collecting all the messages. There's some good stuff, but it seems like the signal-to-noise ratio in Netnews keeps falling, especially since the riffraff on Prodigy, CompuServe, and AOL have started getting access. And of course, not everyone agrees about which stuff is the good stuff. I've subscribed to rec.humor.funny, and if I could get only Joe Constant's puns, I'd be a happy man. But I know there's some people with bad taste out there who can't stand puns. So this is a typical solution to this problem of separating out the wheat from the chaff, or not being able to. But we think there's a better way. We can predict a user's interest in each post before she decides whether to read it. The predictions will be indicators of the quality of the items as assessed by other people, not just the topical match. And people will be able to read the sublime and skip the ridiculous. So after you read a post, you enter a rating through one of those buttons, 1 to 5. 5 if you liked it, 1 if you didn't, or something in between. Then an algorithm combines all those ratings to make predictions. Just like John with the restaurants, the algorithm looks at who agreed in the past with the current user, then takes a weighted average of their ratings for the new articles. The predictions then get displayed in this client. They've been converted to horizontal bar graphs. The longer the bars, the higher the prediction. So the reader could quickly jump down to read John Barfield's post in the thread about the virtual office and Mark Green's post about virtual reality and CSCW. The architecture of the group lens system is built on top of the existing Netnews infrastructure, not replacing it. So no modifications are necessary to the news servers. We did make modifications to the news clients, to a few of them. That's the software that keeps track of which groups you're subscribed to, which items you've already read, and then displays the next articles on your screen. The way we modified them is to collect ratings from the end user. That's clicking the 1 to 5, and send those to a server. Those are the check marks in the figure, the user's ratings, for 3 check marks for entering a 3. And then the clients get predictions back from the rating server. That's the number like 3.72 in the figure. And then the client will display those in some way that enhances the reading experience. John will tell you about some of the alternative ways we've used the predictions. We've called the rating servers Better Bit Bureaus, by analogy to the Better Business Bureau, which rates businesses. We're hoping that we won't get a cease and desist order from them for trademark infringement. And I'm going to turn it over now to John, who's going to tell you more about some of the design issues.
The first design issue we considered is how should users enter their ratings into a system like this? And there are a bunch of possibilities. One possibility is that a rating indicates your interest in a topic. For instance, if you're very interested in World War II, you would rate all of the articles about World War II high. But just a few months ago, inside of the rec.humor news group, there was a 6-month-long discussion of World War II and whether it was America or England that was more important for the victory of the Allies in World War II. And you might decide that you didn't want to rate that high, even though it was an article on your love World War II. You also might prefer to rate on dimensions like the quality of the writing, or the author, or the credentials of the author, for instance. Now, our experience in trying out a bunch of different rating mechanisms with users is that simple, easy-to-use ratings mechanisms are better than more sophisticated ratings mechanisms that allow more dimensions of expression. So we've settled on one very easy interpretation. As a rater, all you have to say is, do I want to see more articles like this? And it's the problem of the statistics engine behind the scenes to figure out what like this means by finding other people who you tend to agree with. Now, one of the challenges in this domain is that it might be that users are not going to provide ratings for each other because it's too much work to provide the ratings. We've tried to make it easy, as we discussed on the previous slide, but rating is still an effort beyond just reading the article. So another possibility is, instead of requiring you to type a number or a letter to say what you thought of the article, we could just watch how long you spend reading each article. And if you spend longer reading an article, we could infer that you liked it more. Now, it turns out that there's an interesting economics problem with this, which is, even though using your reading time as a rating is free for you, because you would have done the reading anyway, right? Free may not be cheap enough, because suppose that all of the people on this side of the room would normally wake up at 6 a.m. to read lolcats. Well, if they discover that the people on this side of the room would wake up at 7 a.m. to read lolcats, then the people on this side of the room are very clever. They realize if they just sleep in until 7:30, they can get the best lolcats picked by the people on this side of the room, who all they did was just look at the lolcats for certain amounts of time, and then the system inferred how much they liked them. So it's possible that you actually have to create an incentive system for raters. And in that incentive system, you would reward people who gave particularly valuable ratings, or maybe you would even reward people who gave particularly early ratings, because those ratings tend to help the community more than later ratings. Now, if you're thinking of doing research in this area, I have to warn you that Paul is also considering working on this problem. The good news is that he's planning to publish in an economics journal, so I predict that you probably have 5 years from now. The next question is how to compute the predictions so that you can fill in these missing entries inside the matrix in a useful way. Now, the first decision that we made is to keep the matrices separate for each news group. It's not obvious that this is the right decision. For instance, the Rec Humor Funny news group and the Rec Humor news group probably have very correlated opinions across people. But on the other hand, we thought that the Rec Humor news group and the Rec Food Recipes news group probably did not have very correlated opinions. So we just kept all of them separate by news group. Now, the rough idea of how the correlation algorithm works is really cool. What you do is you look for people who have rated a bunch of items, and for me, I find a group of other people who I tend to agree with. So for instance, I pick out Brent as someone whose opinions I value, and then the algorithm finds me a collection of neighbors and computes the distance from me to each one of those neighbors. And then it does a simple weighted aggregation to predict for me what I'll think of something that I haven't seen that a bunch of my neighbors have seen. The details of the algorithm are in the paper for those of you who want to implement an up-to-date correlation algorithm. Now, here's one of the modern newsreaders that we've instrumented to add the group lens predictions to it. And you can see this has 4 columns in it. On the left-hand side is who wrote each post. In the middle is how long the post is. And then the third column is the prediction from the Better Bit Bureau of what you personally will think of that post to help you pick it out for reading it. This is the Newswatcher newsreader that Paul mentioned a second ago. And as he said, it uses bar graphs. And one of the advantages of the bar graphs is you can just scan down to pick the articles you'd be interested in. We also instrumented the GNU's newsreader, which I'm sure many of you are aware is implemented in Emacs Lisp on top of Emacs. And the great thing about that is that means it's easy for us to modify it any way we want. So in particular, we were able to sort the threads by prediction so that you'd get the threads that were highest predicted for you at the top and then the lower predicted ones down at the bottom to make it easy to skim a news group very quickly. A challenge is exactly how do you sort a thread? What we chose, because it was easiest, was to sort by the initial prediction of the first article in that thread. By examination, we found a number of cases where that looks like the wrong approach, because there was a later article that was really fascinating. You know, Jonathan came in and just kind of cleaned up the whole thing after we started out with the relatively banal topic. And so we think maybe the max prediction in the thread would be a better sort criteria, but we haven't experimented with that. Now, it would also be possible for a client like GNU's to be instrumented to filter out the articles that you would not like, so that you'd come to a news group and you'd see exactly the articles that you'd like. And so Stuart would get exactly the set of 10 articles he wants to read from Rec Humor and nothing else. Of course, this raises the specter of censorship. Are we building a system that prevents people from seeing articles that they would be interested in? Now, we want to emphasize that in the group lens architecture you're going to see in a minute, all articles are distributed everywhere. There's no effort of the system to prevent anybody from seeing any article. And furthermore, each person is conceptually choosing his or her own moderator. So if you come into a news group and you start rating the articles, then Leisha is rating articles she likes. And the system is automatically finding sort of a distributed moderator personalized to Leisha. So in a sense, it is true that there's a risk that we could be herds of sheep following these moderators. But the good news is that there would be lots of different herds, each following our own moderators. So hopefully that will prevent too much groupthink. Now, one of the questions that we struggled with, as you saw in the couple slides in the introduction, is how to think about privacy issues for the evaluations. At the top here, the simplest approach is just to have everybody sign their evaluations so that you would know who it was who expressed an opinion. But then you have a lot of privacy problems. So at the bottom, we explored anonymous rating systems where people could express opinions on as many things as they wanted, and then we would just aggregate them anonymously. There's a big problem with anonymous ratings, though, which is you can't personalize them. So remember, we said we were going to give Laisha her own moderator and then predict for her what articles she would like. Well, if she's been rating anonymously, we can't give her her own moderator. So instead, we went with pseudonyms. And the idea is that you rate, and we know your ratings across time as if they're attached to this pseudonym, but we can't map that pseudonym back to your real-life persona. So when you connect to the system and you provide it the pseudonym, then you get your personalized predictions. Now here's the basic architecture that Paul showed you a second ago. On the top, you've got the news server. On the bottom, you've got the Better Bit Bureau, and the clients in between. And if there's somebody who wants to read using a different news server, because different news servers require local logons, then she can connect back to our Better Bit Bureau and just use those predictions. There's a danger of that approach, though, maybe two dangers. One, of course, is scalability. This means that we in Minnesota and MIT have to provide the only Better Bit Bureaus in the world. But the other problem is that Better Bit Bureaus might be unfair. So for instance, if you're using Paul's Better Bit Bureau, you know that every article on tennis is going to be scored really, really high. Where if you're using my Better Bit Bureau, it's going to be all the articles on squash that are scored really high. So what you might prefer to have is the ability to choose a Better Bit Bureau to connect to so that you get the fair predictions that you trust. And so we adjusted the architecture so that the clients feed ratings to the Better Bit Bureau on the left-hand side. And then the Better Bit Bureau actually writes those ratings to the news server in shadow news groups. So every news group that we're providing predictions on has a shadow rating news group that's just for the ratings. Those ratings are then distributed to any news servers that are interested in GroupLens ratings, and then local Better Bit Bureaus can slurp the ratings in and produce their own predictions. So the great thing about this is it's a completely distributed sharing of ratings with local decisions about how Better Bit Bureaus behave, and then clients get to choose which Better Bit Bureaus they wish to connect to. Now this raises the issue of scaling in a serious way, because we're expecting 10 or 100 or 1,000 ratings per article. And the good news is most of these ratings won't be pictures of naked people, so they compress a lot better than most articles on Netnews. And it's also possible to aggregate them. So for instance, you could take all of the ratings from one site that were on one article and write all of those ratings into a single message in the shadow news group, and then they would distribute better. And it's also possible to partition them. So for instance, Paul could develop a reputation for running the best tennis Better Bit Bureau, and so all the tennis-related ratings could go to him. And I could have the squash Better Bit Bureau, and all the squash ratings would come to me, but we wouldn't need each other's ratings to do our predictions. And then the clients would just pick a Better Bit Bureau to connect to as a function of the news group. There's been a number of projects that are related to GroupLens, and we classify them according to 4 different dimensions on the right-hand side there. The first is, to what extent do they combine multiple pieces of information from other users to produce a prediction for this user? The second column is, how do they deal with privacy, from no privacy protections to anonymity and pseudonymity. The third is, are they taste-based? Do they personalize for each person? So again, Laisha gets her predictions and not just the predictions of the crowd. And the fourth is, do they use a distributed mechanism so that in principle you could have the prediction engines at many different places on the internet. Now, the information explosion threatens to wipe us all out. We have way too much information to deal with, and it's really hard to figure out what things we ought to read, what things we ought to look at, and what things we can safely ignore. What we think in Group Lens is that one of the possibilities is that if we all as a community get together and share our judgments on information items, on things that we might like or might dislike, and then we use computer algorithms to aggregate all that information and to help produce for us personalized views of what stuff on the internet we really care about, that there's a great opportunity to manage this information overload problem. In Group Lens, we're just one point in this very rich design space, and we're well aware of that. We tried to build an open architecture, and we'd like to invite all of you to consider coming and joining us and helping solve the problem of information overload. Thank you very much.
Step out of character now, back into the present. We wanted to share a little bit of the backstory of like how did we start working on this, and then talk about how did we do? You know, what did we get right and what did we get wrong? So we actually met. We might have met earlier, but we talked for the first time at the CSCW 92 conference 2 years prior to this paper. We hung around the conference, and then we sat together at one of the keynote talks, which John remembers better than I am. He's going to tell you the story.
So the talk was given by Professor Shumpai Kumon, who was visiting professor at University of Washington. And he gave a talk about the wisdom economy. And his idea is that we've seen this evolution going from the barter economy through the information age, and now he predicts the next generation is going to be wisdom. And what he means by wisdom is that no one's going to be worried about growing peas anymore. All we're going to be worried about is exchanging information and helping each other find the valuable information. And the most important things in that wisdom economy are how you disseminate, create, and share information. And we thought about that problem and listened to his talk, and he seemed to be envisioning that there would be an AI agent that would somehow solve that problem for us, and that all we would have to do is just use that AI agent and everything would take care of itself. But back in '94, we could tell that it would certainly be 10 years before that AI agent solved all the information problems of the world. So we thought we had a small window in which to create a system that would solve it in a different way. And there's this great quote that AI practitioners share among each other that says that artificial intelligence is the job of having computers do poorly what humans do well. And that was a thing that we thought we could avoid. And the way we would avoid it is we'd be having humans make these judgments of taste and value and quality, and then use computer algorithms just to combine the judgments. And I can still remember standing with Paul outside a room like this one, except 10 times bigger, with all of the CSCW participants streaming by us and talking about this and figuring out this basic architecture that we just showed you in half an hour or something right there in that hallway.
Yeah. So the basic idea we came up with at the conference, and I think a key to making it work, because we went back to our respective places, was that we could divide up the work as well. On my side, we could work on a Macintosh-based client, and he could work on the Unix-based clients, and all we had to do was make them work together. Now, I think that division of labor was a key to making the collaboration possible. You have to remember back then we were paying by the minute for phone calls, and we didn't have Google Hangouts. So, what did we get right and what did we get wrong?
So first of all, the basic idea of a recommender system like this. This was an idea that was kind of floating around in the community at the time. You saw in that chart the number of other projects that were going on. And in fact, within 6 months, there were 2 Chi papers on very similar ideas. Over the next few years, there were tons of papers published at a wide range of conferences: Chi, CSCW, KDD, World Wide Web Conference, AAAI. And And within a year of our giving this talk, a different MIT group had founded a company, Firefly, and was commercializing this technology already. Now, over the last 5 years, there's been just an explosion of interest in recommenders. Practically every e-commerce site that is anything has to have a recommender. And there is now an ACM Rexis conference, which has been going for 5 years, and gets 300 to 400 people attending every year. And it'll be in October this year in Hong Kong, so please come join us. So we score ourselves as yes on the basic idea.
So we make a big deal out of personalized, aggregated predictions. And that's a key insight. And it turned out to be important for things like movies and books, but not for everything. Sometimes personalization hasn't been necessary. If you look at Stack Overflow, Slashdot, Reddit, they have ratings, they aggregate the ratings, but they just add them up, and then they sort things based on the ratings, or filter based on the ratings, and everybody gets the same filtering, and that seems to be good enough for applications like that. Sometimes even aggregating the recommendations doesn't seem to be necessary. If you think of Twitter and people putting in links to news articles, most people are still consuming that by reading the actual tweets, not by having some program accumulate all of the tweets and put them into sort of a cumulative recommendation, although there are things that will do that for you. So on personalized aggregated predictions, sort of.
The next one is the cool distributed open architecture we came up with, where different people could run their own recommender systems, and every customer could pick a recommender system that they trusted in each domain. Unfortunately, in the commercial world, it didn't work out that way. This is kind of a classic problem in capitalism, which is that whoever has the money buys what they want. So, you know, if you are motivated enough, you buy a congressman. If you're going to run a recommender system, you want to run a recommender system that's going to make more money for your business. So you want it recommending high profit value items. And you know, it was my hope that Consumer Reports would come in and run a recommender system that we could trust and that would be unbiased. And that just hasn't happened yet at all. Now, part of the reason is actually our fault, which is we founded our company about a year after Firefly founded their company. Ours is called Net Perceptions. And Firefly had the model that they would collect all of the ratings data from every customer that they sold Firefly to, and they'd have it all in Boston. And they would use all that data to make better recommendations for everybody in the world. And our way of differentiating from them was we decided to be a server-oriented approach instead of a service-oriented approach, where we would sell you a recommender engine as a company, and then you could do whatever you wanted with it. So that led to companies being able to approach things in this way, where they would build their own recommender to serve their needs instead of potentially serving the needs of the customers. So on architecture, we failed.
Oh, and what did those rating servers get called? So we did get a cease and desist order from the Better Business Bureau. You may not use 2 out of 3 out of those words.
Although it was the sweetest cease and desist letter I've ever gotten. I won't tell you how many I've gotten. This lawyer wrote and said, I really love what you guys are doing. This is so wonderful to see. But I have to tell you, we have to protect our trademarks, so.
All right, danger of social fragmentation. This is one that we didn't mention in the talk, but the paper has a whole little subsection titled The Global Village, or Global Villages, a reference to Marshall McLuhan, and we raised the concern that with personalization, the global village would fracture into small tribes. Now this sort of presages the Eli Paris or filter bubble argument that we had a panel about a couple of days ago at this conference. The argument we made in the original paper is that different people seeing different things is inevitable and good. That the concern should not be about fracturing the global village into tribes, but the permanence and permeability of those tribes. And that through multi-membership, people being in multiple groups, you would still have a good way for information to move around among the tribes. Actually, Ron Burt celebrated the people who do that in his opening plenary. The people who join a tribe for a while, then go cross-fertilize, but maintain some trust connections with that original. So I still believe that argument. What we missed in the original formulation was thinking about recommendations as over collections of items rather than for individual items. And there's been a very interesting line of work over the past decade on trying to produce some kind of diversity in the recommendations. Somebody, if they were only going to get one article, might really like to have a sports article rather than anything else. But that doesn't mean when they're going to have 8 articles that they want 8 sports articles. They might like to have some world news in there. And so that's been a line of work that we did not anticipate here. So overall, we gave ourselves a check, but didn't get it all.
Next is our algorithm. One of the things we're very proud about our algorithm is that it was good enough to work okay, so people would use it and enjoy it, but it was bad enough to leave plenty of room for other people to make better algorithms. And it turns out that in commercial practice, the user-user algorithm, as it's now called, that I described a few minutes ago, where we build neighborhoods of users, is commercially useless. And the main reason is that almost all companies have many more customers than they have products. Now, this incidentally was not true at the time in the internet boom that we were creating this product, but all the companies that have survived, it is true of. And what that means is that in practice, the relationships between users are much less stable than the relationships between products. And so commercially, the item-item algorithm has been much more successful, where you build relatively stable relationships between items and then make predictions based on those. And there have also been some very interesting algorithms based on dimensionality reduction, linear algebra techniques to reduce the dimensionality of the space that are some of the best known ones now. One of the things that was really exciting for the field in algorithms was a few years back, Netflix announced the Netflix $1 Million Challenge, where they actually gave $1 million to a research group that improved their recommender algorithm by 10%. Now it's interesting that that algorithm, I would say, cheated. What it actually did was it used a technique called stacking to build an ensemble of over 100 different algorithms, each of which added a tiny little residual value to the recommendation. And if you talk to the people in the commercial world, they say, well, we can't possibly do that, right? We need the one big algorithm that we can run, maybe 1 or 2 others to collect some residuals. So we give ourselves a fail on that one.
Implicit evaluations. So John mentioned the idea of capturing people's reading time rather than only their explicit ratings. And but most of the paper really was all about assuming people are going to give you a number from 1 to 5. And if you see that as the field has evolved, there are some places where you give explicit ratings, the like button, Netflix where you give numbers 1 to 5. But I think implicit evaluations have turned out to be even more important. And it wasn't so much the reading time, but what did people click on and what did they buy. So Amazon has people who bought this item also bought this other item. And what I find especially useful, people who looked at this item bought this other item instead. And those turn out to be just the things that we do in the process of doing other things, leave traces that turn out to be useful guidance for other people. So implicit evaluations, we said were important. Well, we said that you could do it. We didn't quite catch how important they would be.
Next is transparency. One of the things that's happened in the field is that it turns out that algorithms that just tell a person, hey, you should go buy this product, have become less important than algorithms that give a user a sense of why they ought to go and take some action. My favorite story about that is a few years back, Joe Constant got a recommendation for the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Now, if you know Joe, you'll know that he has never watched a martial arts film in his life. and there's no chance that he would possibly like that martial arts film. So he asked Amazon, why is it that you're recommending to me that I should buy Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? And they said, oh, that's easy. We matched you up with other users, and based on your having purchased the book, The Joy of Cooking, and your having purchased the book, Hidden Treasures of the Talmud, we figured out you would like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because somebody else who bought those two books also liked Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Now, Joe says that he thinks that's one of the great successes of explanation in history, because he knew immediately that he could ignore that recommendation and move on with his life. And we've seen a number of other cases like this, most often these days, very rich interactions where the user is kind of in control and guiding a recommender system to get better results for that user. And we think that may be the future, and we completely missed it.
John alluded to this with the free may not be cheap enough argument, in that we were going to have to compensate people for being early evaluators, providing useful information to other people who would then decide whether they were going to try the product or not. I'd say basically no. That hasn't turned out to be the case. It was good for me for that economics paper that came out 5 years later. But it turns out there are a lot of people out there who do want to be first. They want to get their voice heard, and they just, they like to have the chance to influence people, and they don't need to be compensated for being the early evaluators. I will note that there is still something going on where there are some places where there is under provision, where there are hidden treasures that are not getting noticed by the raters. Eric Gilbert had a paper yesterday, I think, noticing this at Reddit, that things that eventually got noticed and upvoted a lot, the first time they get posted, maybe didn't get noticed and upvoted a lot. So there's something going on there, but it isn't in most settings, we don't need to compensate the early evaluators. We gave ourselves a check for this?
Uh-oh.
I don't think so.
So you'll see that we batted around 500, which for baseball players isn't too bad. But think of the impact this paper could have had if we actually got it right. So the rest of this conversation is yours. What we're doing is we're leaving up our batting average, and we also have 3 personal thoughts that we're happy to take questions from down at the bottom of the slide. And ask us anything you'd want. Please come up to the microphone if you can, or otherwise stand up and shout if you can. Well, thank you for that.